Hello. Tonight we drift into a quiet corner of Greek mythology, where the world slows, the air cools, and a single moment beneath the night sky stretches into something timeless. Imagine a hillside warmed from the day, but now settling under a blanket of soft darkness. Crickets hum in the distance. The moon hangs low and round, and perhaps you can almost feel that calm invitation the night sometimes offers, as if the world is letting out a long breath. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you want, share your location and your local time in the comments. People all around the world fall asleep to these stories, and it's always comforting to see where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. Endymion had always been comfortable beneath the stars. Even before the legends would whisper his name, before myths wound their way through his memory. He liked to wander at night, letting the day's noise fall away. The villagers sometimes joked that he must have had a map of the sky hidden somewhere, because he always seemed to know when the moon would rise bright or when it would ghost behind thin clouds. Endymion himself would only smile. He didn't have a map. He simply listened, really listened to the world around him. At night, the world spoke more slowly, and its messages were easier to understand. This particular evening felt a little different from the start. The air was unusually still, carrying that soft hint of coming sleep, the kind that makes even the most restless thoughts settle. Endymion climbed the familiar hill above his village, its grasses brushing lightly against his legs. It was a warm hillside, shaped like a shoulder, leaning against the sky, and he'd spent countless nights lying there, staring upward and letting the stars keep him company. But tonight, he felt something new, an expectation he couldn't name, as if the night had something quietly waiting for him. He stretched out on the grass, folding his hands behind his head. The moon shone so clearly that it seemed close enough to touch round, pale, and calm. As he watched it, his eyelids grew heavy, and the hill beneath him softened into something that felt more like a cradle. Sleep came gently, not in a sudden drop, but in a slow, steady drift, like slipping into warm water. And just like that, the world shifted. Endymion didn't realize at first that he had entered a dream. The hillside was still there, but the colors were softer. The moonlight felt thicker, almost like mist. The air held a faint glow, and the stars above seemed arranged with a sense of purpose he hadn't noticed before. He sat up slowly, not startled, simply curious. The dream wrapped around him with a quiet certainty, like a hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He took a few steps forward. The grass under his feet had changed. It no longer bent and rustled, but moved with a slow, wave-like motion, as though stirred by a breeze he couldn't feel. Still, nothing felt threatening, only unfamiliar, serene, and deeply calm. He continued until he reached the edge of the hill, where in waking life he would have looked down at the sleeping village. Here, though, the valley below was covered in silver fog, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Endymion didn't question it. Dream logic made everything feel acceptable, but he did sense that this dream wasn't one of his typical soft, meandering night wanderings. Something held shape here. Something was guiding him. He whispered a simple greeting, just a soft, "Hello?" And the sound drifted away from him, stretching farther than a voice should travel. For a moment, he thought he heard an echo, but it wasn't quite that. It was more like someone answering him from a great distance, a gentle ripple in the dream. The sensation made him smile. Even asleep, he was polite enough to say hello to a dream. He began walking down a path he hadn't noticed before, one that curved through the glowing fog and seemed to lead toward a deeper kind of quiet. His steps made no sound, and he felt almost weightless. The moon above followed him. He could feel it, the same way one feels a presence in a room even with eyes closed. Endymion didn't know yet that this night, this dream, would linger long after he woke. He didn't know that the soft moonlight he felt would become part of his story, whispered far beyond the hillside he'd wandered since childhood. For now, he only knew that he was drifting deeper into a serenity so complete it felt like the world was gently holding its breath around him. Somewhere far beyond the fog, something stirred, not frighteningly, just patiently, as if waiting for him to come closer. And Endymion, ever curious, ever gentle, kept walking. The path beneath Endymion's feet wound downward with a slow, fluid motion, as if the dream itself were adjusting its shape to guide him. He felt no urgency. Dreams rarely rushed him. Instead, the air seemed to hum with a steady, comforting rhythm, faint, like a heartbeat beneath layers of calm. The fog thinned as he walked, revealing more of the hillside, but everything was different from the world he knew. The grass glowed softly, not with any colour he could name, but with a pale shimmer that reminded him of moonlit dew. He paused and crouched, brushing his fingers across the blades. To his surprise, the grass responded. It leaned toward his touch, almost like a cat nudging a familiar hand. He let out a quiet laugh, the kind of gentle breath that feels too soft to be called laughter, but still carried warmth. Even in a dream, he wasn't used to the landscape reacting to him. Usually, he simply drifted through scenes, nothing more than a passerby. But here, the dream seemed alert, aware of him in a way that made him feel unexpectedly welcome. When he stood up again, the hillside shifted subtly. A breeze rose, not a natural breeze, but something that felt like a greeting. The air brushed past him in a slow arc, blowing his hair back, then curling around him before drifting onward. He watched it move down the slope, stirring the shimmering grass in gentle waves. It reminded him of someone sweeping a hand across water just for the pleasure of watching it ripple. As the breeze faded, he noticed a faint sound, soft, rhythmic, and almost musical. At first, he thought it was the wind again, but when he listened more closely, he realized it was coming from the hillside itself. The ground seemed to vibrate with a quiet melody, low and soothing. He couldn't make out any words, if there were any at all, but the tone felt kind, as though the land was humming to itself. Endymion tilted his head and whispered, "Are you singing?" He wasn't really expecting an answer, but the melody swelled ever so slightly, almost like the hillside had heard him and was proud of being noticed. He continued walking, now with a strange new awareness. His steps influenced the world. When he moved, the fog shifted. When he brushed his hand along a patch of grass, it leaned toward him. Even the distant shapes of hills in the dream's horizon seemed to stretch a little taller when he glanced at them, like children trying to impress a visitor. The path led him to a small ridge, where he could see more of the dream's landscape. In waking life, the view from his favourite hill was simple. A valley, a few clusters of trees, and the roofs of the village. But here, the valley was endless. It extended far beyond anything familiar, filled with layered hills, silver streams, and expanses of glowing grass that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the melody beneath his feet. A gentle realization settled over him. This dream wasn't random. Dreams often hop from one place to another, skipping logic entirely, but this one held structure. It felt crafted, as if shaped intentionally, not just by his mind, but by something beyond it. He placed a hand over his chest and felt his heartbeat steady, slow, synced almost perfectly with the land's soft hum. He didn't know whether the dream was matching his heartbeat or whether he was matching its. but the connection felt peaceful, grounding. Endymion walked again, moving toward a cluster of tall grasses swaying in circular patterns. Each blade moved independently, yet perfectly in sync, like dancers who had rehearsed together for years. When he drew near, they bent slightly, creating an opening just wide enough for him to pass. It didn't feel eerie, only considerate, as if the dream had good manners. He stepped through, and behind him, the grasses closed gently, forming a whisper-soft wall that rustled with a tone of farewell. He couldn't help smiling. If he ever tried to describe this later, he knew no one would believe him. Hills that shifted, grass that bowed, a breeze with the personality of a friendly neighbour, he'd be laughed out of the village. Still, this dream felt more real and more attentive than many conversations he'd had in waking life. As he moved deeper, he sensed the dream thickening not physically, but in presence. The melody beneath the ground grew clearer, and the air warmed slightly, like something ahead was waiting. The hillside seemed to lean inward, narrowing the path not to trap him, but to guide him. There was a moment brief, almost imperceptible, when he had the odd feeling he was being studied, not watched in a threatening way, but observed with curiosity. The way one might look at a new star in the sky and wonder where it came from. Endymion slowed his pace, letting the dream respond. The grass rustled. The fog pulsed once, like a quiet exhale. The moonlight overhead intensified just a little, bright enough to cast soft shadows along the curve of the hill. "All right," he murmured, "I'm listening." And as if satisfied with his willingness, the landscape shifted again, this time more decisively. A distant figure or presence, not yet visible, stirred the air ahead. The dream leaned toward it, guiding Endymion with the gentle patience of a hand on his back. The hillside whispered, and Endymion followed. The air ahead of Endymion shifted in a way that made him pause subtle but unmistakable. Until now, the dream had felt like a responsive landscape, warm and attentive, but not personal. This was different. The breeze softened, the melody beneath the ground dimmed to a hush, and even the glowing grasses seemed to still themselves, as though the entire dream were waiting for something or someone. Endymion's heartbeat didn't quicken. If anything, it slowed, matching the rhythm of the hushed hills. There was no fear in him, only curiosity, threaded with the kind of calm anticipation he sometimes felt before a rare meteor shower. The kind of moment where the world holds its breath, not in warning, but in awe. A faint glow formed ahead, hovering just above the ridge he was approaching. It wasn't bright or blinding. The light was soft, diffused, almost shy. It flickered once, then steadied, and with every heartbeat he took, the glow seemed to draw nearer. He couldn't see a shape yet, just the illumination, like moonlight gathering itself. He stepped forward slowly, not wanting to disturb whatever presence was approaching. The grasses parted on their own, clearing a small circular space around him. The path behind him closed gently, as though encouraging him to stay right where he stood. The glow drifted closer. At first, it reminded him of a lantern being carried through thick fog. But it wasn't a flame. It was far too smooth, too cool for that. As it neared, the light elongated, forming faint outlines that hinted at movement. Endymion watched, transfixed, as the glow resolved into the shape of a figure subtle, like it was made of moonlight rather than flesh. The figure halted at the edge of the clearing. Endymion couldn't make out a face, just a gentle radiance gathered into the suggestion of one. Not frightening, not imposing. If anything, the presence felt peaceful, steady, like someone who had walked through countless nights and collected the calm of each one. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Endymion wasn't sure the visitor even had a voice. Dreams were funny like that. Sometimes they spoke in words, sometimes in feelings, sometimes in that strange logic that makes perfect sense until morning coffee arrives. The figure lifted a hand again, not a hand in the physical sense, but a shape of light that moved like one, and the air responded. A soft breeze curled around Endymion, carrying a sense of greeting. Not a greeting he could translate, but one he could feel, a subtle warmth, a gentle acknowledgement, as though the visitor had been waiting for him. Endymion, unsure of protocol when meeting a glowing celestial presence, lifted his own hand in return. "Hello," he whispered, feeling slightly self-conscious but still sincere. The visitor didn't speak out loud. Instead, a sensation swept through the clearing, a warm, rising pulse that felt like moonlight settling directly into his chest. It wasn't overpowering. It simply eased into him, like stepping into a warm bath at the perfect temperature. The pulse carried a message, not made of words, but of emotion. "You are welcome." Endymion exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he murmured. The figure moved closer, and the dream shifted accordingly. The fog lifted, drifting upward in thin veils, revealing a path behind the visitor one Endymion hadn't noticed before. The ground beneath his feet glowed brighter, matching the visitor's light. Even the melody in the earth returned, softer, harmonizing with the silent presence, as if greeting an old friend. Endymion took a step toward the figure, and the figure responded by drifting back slightly, not in retreat, but in invitation, like someone holding a door open and giving a gentle nod. He followed, feeling the dream rearrange itself with every step. The grasses retreated, the air warmed further, and the sky above began to shift. The moon seemed closer now, its light deepening into silvery blue hues. Stars reoriented themselves, creating patterns he had never seen before, lines and arcs that seemed less like constellations and more like paths. The figure turned toward him fully now, and for a brief instant he could swear he saw eyes soft, bright, full of patience. The impression lasted only a second before the glow returned to its gentle indistinctness. Endymion was struck by the feeling that this presence wasn't simply part of the dream, it was shaping the dream, guiding it, perhaps even guiding him. "What are you?" he asked quietly, not expecting an answer, but unable to resist the question. A breeze stirred, the pulse of light shifted. A single thought brushed against his mind. Not intrusive, not overwhelming, just present. Not what, who. He felt the words more than heard them, like someone whispering gently into the space behind his thoughts. Endymion nodded slowly, absorbing the meaning. "Then, who are you?" he asked, voice still soft, still respectful. The visitor didn't answer, not yet. Instead, the glow brightened slightly and drifted down the newly revealed path. The dream hummed in encouragement, urging Endymion forward. He followed again, more certain now, feeling the shift in the dream's atmosphere. The landscape felt less like a place he was exploring and more like a place he was being led through. Each step deepened the calm around him. And even though the figure remained silent, its presence spoke in countless quiet ways. Gentle motions, soft pulses of light, the warmth in the air. Whatever this celestial visitor was, it had arrived for him, and the dream would never be the same. The path narrowed as Endymion followed the glowing figure, but it never felt confining. Instead, the world seemed to fold gently inward, like cupped hands offering protection. The air dimmed in a curious way, not darker exactly, but quieter. The soft glow from the visitor illuminated enough for him to walk without hesitation, while the remaining landscape eased into a velvety dusk. Endymion didn't feel lost. In fact, He felt more grounded than he had in any dream he could remember. The presence ahead of him moved with slow certainty, a quiet guide whose very glow hummed with reassurance. Every time it drifted a little farther down the path, it glanced back, or seemed to, in the way light shifts, and waited for him. There was something deeply patient about it, as though it would walk this dream with him for as long as he needed. The path led them into a hollow where the hills curved inward to form a natural bowl. Above, the sky felt impossibly close. The moon hung directly overhead, larger, fuller, and brighter than he had ever seen it, even in dreams. Its light spread across the hollow in gentle waves, leaving the ground shimmering like fine sand. Endymion stepped into the centre, the visitor beside him. He felt a change immediately. The air grew still, not frozen, not heavy, but held in a perfect, unbroken calm. Even his breath seemed quieter. The only sound was the faint hum of the dream beneath his feet, still attuned to him, still carrying that soft, rhythmic melody. The celestial figure drifted a little ahead, then turned to face him fully. Its glow brightened, but not in a harsh way. It was the kind of brightness that felt like a warm hand on the cheek, gentle, caring, certain. For the first time, Endymion sensed an emotion radiating from the figure. Something like tenderness, mixed with a quiet sorrow. The air stirred, and a soft darkness began to seep into the hollow, not a threatening darkness, more like the natural night settling in. The moonlight still shone, but its edges blurred slightly, as though the dream were shifting once more. Endymion looked around, sensing that something was changing in him as well. A stillness filled his chest, warm and comforting, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. The figure lifted its hand again, and the darkness deepened around them. In that moment, Endymion understood, without being told, that the dream was revealing a choice. He didn't know how he knew. He didn't hear words. Instead, the meaning reached him through the light, through the hum in the ground, through the strange closeness of the sky above him. The dream hadn't brought him here to show him visions or to wander endlessly. It had brought him here to offer him something. The celestial presence drifted closer, stopping just an arm's length away. Its glow faded to a warmth rather than a brightness, allowing the soft darkness to settle around them. The moon overhead flickered, not dimming, but shifting, almost like a heartbeat. The whole dream pulsed in sync. Endymion felt it in his chest. Something gentle but immense was being laid before him. A sensation washed through him, another message without words. Stay. The meaning was deeper than the single word implied. It wasn't simply about staying in the hollow. It was an invitation to remain in this dream, in this soft, suspended night. To let the world outside drift away, to step into something eternal, a night that would cradle him forever. Endymion inhaled slowly. The choice felt peaceful, not ominous. The dream wasn't trying to trap him. If anything, it was offering him a gift, a life without fear, without aging, without the noise of days, a life held tenderly under an unending, serene night. The visitor watched him, waiting. Endymion lowered his eyes to his hands. He flexed his fingers slowly, grounding himself in the small reality of movement. He imagined the world. He knew the hillside, the villagers who teased him kindly, the familiar warmth of sunlight on his face. He imagined the simple joys of waking life, the laughter shared on long walks, the scent of early morning bread from the tiny bakery in town. But then he imagined this dream, the peace of it, the way the landscape responded to his presence, the way the moonlight made the world feel soft and safe, the silent companionship of the celestial visitor, whose glow felt like a promise. A tiny smile tugged at his lips. "I don't think I meant to stay forever." he said softly. At least, not yet. The visitor didn't recoil or dim in disappointment. Instead, its light brightened gently, as if in approval. The dream pulsed again, this time with a sense of acknowledgement. The choice had been offered, and he had chosen. But the dream wasn't done. The visitor extended a hand closer now, radiating a soft, shimmering light. Endymion hesitated only a moment before reaching out. When their hands met, a wave of warmth rolled through the hollow. It wasn't a binding or a tether. It was a blessing, a connection, a quiet promise that this place would remain with him, that he could return not to stay eternally, but to seek peace whenever the world felt too loud. The soft darkness receded. The moonlight steadied. The hollow brightened with gentle clarity. And Endymion felt himself drifting upward, backward, outward, as the dream slowly released him. He had made his choice, and the night, eternal or not, honoured it. The quiet of Endymion's dream faded like a soft tide drawing back from shore, and in its place another kind of stillness rose, earthy, warm, and touched with the faint sweetness of blooming petals. The world shifted gently, as if turning a page to a new story, though the calm tone of the night lingered like a comforting echo. Time loosened its grip, stretching thin, until even the smallest sound seemed unhurried. Here, beneath the earth, yet never dark, Persephone stepped into her hidden garden. It was a place few knew existed, not even most of the spirits who wandered the underworld's broader halls. Persephone had shaped it long ago, during the early years of learning to balance two worlds. The vibrant surface, where she spent her spring and summer, and the quiet depths, where she ruled beside Hades. This garden was neither realm exactly. It was a pause between them, a sanctuary where time softened, slowed, and even on certain days seemed to stop altogether. As she crossed the arching stone threshold, the air brightened. Beneath her steps, the pathway of pale river pebbles warmed, glowing faintly as though recognizing her presence. The garden always greeted her this way, with a gentle warmth that rose from the ground like a familiar embrace. Persephone paused, taking in the first breath of the space. Even she, goddess though she was, needed a moment to adjust to the kind of quiet held here. It wasn't an empty quiet. It was the quiet of pages that have been turned many times, the quiet of soft soil settling after being tended, the quiet that follows a deep conversation, full, meaningful, and somehow alive. The plants that filled this secret refuge weren't entirely like those above ground. Some grew in colours that didn't exist in sunlight, shades between shades, luminous and subtle. Others leaned lazily against stones, as if they had all the time in the world to curl upward or spread outward. A few floated, their roots suspended in shimmering air rather than soil, drifting like slow-moving lanterns. And Persephone loved them all. She walked forward, brushing her fingertips across the nearest blossom's petals, the colour of dawn clouds, soft and cool to the touch. As she did, the flower released a faint glow, just enough to illuminate her hand. A small smile touched her lips. "Hello," she whispered to it, and the blossom seemed to brighten in response. The garden answered her presence the same way the dream had answered Endymion, though in a gentler, earth-rooted manner. Leaves rustled in a soft wave. Stones warmed beneath the moss that draped them. A cluster of tiny star-shaped flowers unfurled fully, stretching toward her as though they'd been waiting. Persephone exhaled a slow, grounding breath she rarely took anywhere else. Down here in the broader underworld, she was queen, judge, diplomat, comforter of wandering souls. Above ground, She was spring's return, the bringer of life, the turning of seasons. But here she could simply be. No titles, no expectations, just Persephone. She stepped deeper into the garden. A pair of vines shifted aside to form a small opening, revealing a circular clearing at the centre. There, a single tree stood thin, graceful, with branches that curved upward like outstretched arms. Its leaves shimmered with a pale silver-green glow, and tiny flecks of golden pollen drifted down steadily, disappearing before they touched the ground. This tree didn't grow anywhere else in the world, not in Olympus, not on Earth, not in Elysium. Persephone had coaxed it into being with a mixture of sunlight carried in her palms and the quiet strength of the underworld's soil. It represented both worlds, and neither entirely. A place to set burdens down, even briefly. She approached it now, placing her hand gently against its bark. A warmth pulsed outward, not hot, not urgent, just the steady reassurance of something living and patient. She felt it seep through her hand and into her chest, loosening something inside her that she hadn't realized had tightened. "Thank you," she murmured. Around her, the garden responded. One by one, blossoms unfurled, leaves turned to face her. The soft hum of drifting pollen deepened into a faint melody, nothing structured, just the natural song of life settling into stillness. Persephone breathed it in, letting her shoulders relax. Down here, she felt every hour of the world, above every changing season, every fading leaf, every sprout stubbornly pushing through the soil when winter gave way to warmth. Holding two worlds in her hands was a gift, yes, but also a weight. Here, that weight softened. She lowered herself onto a smooth stone bench, partly hidden beneath flowering vines. The stone warmed instantly beneath her, moulding gently to support her back. She looked around the garden, not searching for anything, just appreciating the slow, quiet motion of it all. Tiny motes of light drifted lazily from a nearby cluster of flowers. They floated around her like dust catching sunlight, even though no sun shone here. Persephone smiled. Sometimes, she thought, the garden liked to show off. One of the drifting blossoms bumped gently into her arm, like a drowsy bee testing whether she was real. She let it rest there for a moment, cupping her hand around it before sending it back into the air with a soft breath. "Another year has turned," she whispered to the garden. "Another part of life to tend." The garden answered her with a blooming hush, gentle, steady, timeless. And Persephone let herself settle into the stillness, feeling time slow to the rhythm of her breathing. In this place of quiet hours, she knew she would hear the things the seasons tried to tell her, even the soft ones. Persephone rose from the stone bench, moving slowly through the garden as if she were walking underwater, each step measured and deliberate. The air seemed to thrum gently with life, and the blossoms, aware of her presence, shifted to greet her in their subtle floral language. Some leaned toward her as though recalling her touch from seasons past. Others whispered faint scents that stirred distant memories of the world above. She approached a row of delicate, bell-shaped flowers whose petals glimmered faintly with hues not found in the ordinary spectrum of sunlight. When she brushed her fingers across them, faint visions flickered in the back of her mind. A warm spring morning on earth, sunlight filtering through olive trees, a bird's song drifting across the air, a child laughing at a village fountain. The blossoms carried fragments of human life, stored carefully, patiently, like the way seashells cradle the sound of waves long gone. Persephone exhaled softly, letting the memories wash over her. She did not need to speak. The flowers communicated in quiet impressions, and she listened. The garden seemed to respond to her attentiveness. A rose whose petals were a deep, shadowed crimson tilted toward her as if presenting a memory it had been holding for decades. Persephone leaned close. Images unfolded gently in her mind. A young man helping an old woman carry firewood. A market bursting with colour and chatter. A hand pressing dough into a wooden pan. These were ordinary moments of life, fleeting to the mortals experiencing them, but preserved here with tenderness. Persephone smiled. The garden had a subtle magic it reminded her of the beauty in the simplest human acts. She moved on to a small patch of lilies, whose white blossoms glowed with a pearly luminescence. As she touched them, she felt echoes of laughter and whispers of secret confessions shared under starlight. Children chasing each other through fields. Lovers stealing brief embraces in shaded groves. An artist tracing lines across parchment with careful concentration. The garden held these snapshots like tiny, delicate lanterns, bright within the muted rhythm of the underworld. Persephone's hand lingered on one bloom, and she felt a quiet longing for these lives above, yet a deep peace knowing the garden could protect and remember them. Some blossoms released memories less joyful, but no less vital. A cluster of small violet flowers trembled beneath her touch, and a hush fell over the garden. She sensed grief, quiet sorrow, the ache of parting small tragedies that humans seldom shared aloud, yet which the garden remembered anyway. Persephone's fingers rested gently on the petals, sending comfort and warmth into the stored impressions. It was not pity she offered, but acknowledgement that each fragment mattered and that none of it would be lost. The garden's magic was patient. Flowers that held memories of a single human life or a single day glimmered faintly, while others carried broader fragments, the rhythm of a season, the scent of rain on dry earth, the hush of dusk falling over villages. Persephone moved among them, tending, touching, and gently acknowledging each one. In return, the blooms seemed to breathe more fully, their glow brightening, their petals unfolding wider. It was a quiet conversation, unspoken, yet deeply understood. A faint wind curled through the garden, carrying the scent of lavender and thyme, mingled with the earthy warmth of soil freshly turned. The petals quivered as the scents intertwined, and fleeting images of the surface world shimmered around. Persephone, a fisherman casting his net into calm waters at dawn, an old storyteller leaning on a cane while recounting tales to children, a flock of geese tracing perfect lines against a sunrise sky. She let these moments settle around her, storing them in her own heart alongside the blooms that held them. She noticed a small, unassuming patch of forget-me-nots, barely glowing among their more brilliant neighbours. When she knelt to touch them, a cascade of memories spilled forth. Quiet evenings in a home warmed by firelight, a mother humming as she sews, the first steps of a baby on a rough wooden floor, the tender hush of night folding over a sleeping child. Persephone smiled softly. These were simple, ordinary pieces of life, yet the garden treated them with the same care as it did the grander, more dramatic moments. Every life, every memory, mattered. As Persephone continued her slow journey through the garden, she realized that tending the flowers was not only about preserving the past, it was also about learning from it. Each memory, whether joyous, mundane, or sorrowful, carried a lesson in patience, empathy, and the quiet rhythms of existence. Here, removed from the hustle and unpredictability of the world above, Persephone could observe these fragments and understand the small, steady pulse that bound life together. It was a responsibility she did not take lightly, yet one that brought her profound peace. The flowers seemed to hum softly as she moved, each memory a note in a gentle symphony that only she could hear. She allowed herself to linger, letting the fragrances, images, and quiet songs mingle in her awareness. In this sacred, hidden garden, Persephone found a rhythm that was both comforting and enlightening, and she knew that tending these blossoms would guide her in both the underworld and the surface world alike. Persephone moved deeper into the garden, her hands brushing over petals and leaves that seemed to respond not only to touch but to intention. The air itself began to shift subtly, carrying the essence of distant seasons, not in abrupt leaps but in gentle sweeps, as if the garden were breathing along with her. Here, the slow, deliberate passage of time was a living thing, something she could witness and even guide. Each step she took seemed to ripple outward, and the garden shifted accordingly, unfolding layers of soft, temporal magic. The first change came as a delicate warming of the air, a subtle rise in the scent of early spring. Tiny green shoots had appeared overnight, curling their way through the soil as if the earth were exhaling life. Persephone knelt and touched a young sapling whose bark shimmered faintly with dewdrop-like light. She felt the pulse of growth within it, a steady rhythm that mirrored her own breath. Here, in this pause between worlds, she could nurture beginnings with a patience impossible on the surface. The garden taught her to slow her expectations and listen carefully to the life unfolding before her. As she walked onward, the sense of spring gave way to something richer, warmer, reminiscent of summer's fullness. Blossoms glowed brighter, their colours deepening, and the subtle hum beneath her feet shifted into a more complex melody. Persephone's fingers traced the edges of a sunflower-like bloom whose petals shimmered with faint golden highlights. When she touched it, a memory of sun-drenched fields and laughter-filled afternoons rose into her awareness, reminding her that warmth could be both comforting and transformative. She let the energy settle into her, not to carry it away, but to anchor it in the garden, where it could bloom safely in perpetuity. A soft wind drifted in, cooler now, carrying the earthy scent of ripening fruits and falling leaves. Autumn had arrived, not abruptly, but like a gentle exhale across the hidden space. The garden adapted instantly, leaves tinged with amber and crimson, petals folding gently in anticipation of the quieter months to come. Persephone reached for a cluster of small, cup-shaped flowers, feeling the whisper of their stored memories. They spoke of endings, of harvests brought to completion, of labours shared, of gentle farewells. She let them unfold in her mind, acknowledging the inevitability of endings and the quiet dignity of transition. Winter's touch followed, faint at first, brushing against her shoulders with a cold that carried no bite, only clarity. Frost shimmered across low-lying leaves, delicate crystals that caught the faint light and broke it into soft, prismatic patterns. Even in this dormancy, the garden hummed with a quiet vitality, as if every frozen petal held the memory of seasons past and the promise of those yet to come. Persephone ran her fingertips over the icy leaves, feeling the pulse of hidden life beneath the frost. She understood that balance was not about stasis, but about allowing each season to breathe and fulfill its purpose. As the garden shifted, so too did Persephone's own awareness. Each seasonal turn mirrored something within her, the hope and renewal of spring, the warmth and vitality of summer, the reflective maturity of autumn, the calm introspection of winter. She moved with intention, tending each area, smoothing petals here, nudging a sprout into sunlight there, adjusting the flow of energies that coursed through the garden. With every touch, she felt a sense of equilibrium growing, not a forced balance, but a natural alignment that whispered of wisdom earned over cycles both brief and eternal. Somewhere near the centre, The tree she had visited earlier stood as a constant anchoring presence. Its leaves subtly shifted with each seasonal change, reflecting the garden's transformations and reinforcing the rhythm of time within this hidden sanctuary. Persephone approached it once more, laying her hand on its trunk. A warm, steady pulse spread through her, synchronizing her breath with the garden's own subtle cadence. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to become both observer and participant, caretaker and recipient of the wisdom embedded in the shifting seasons. A gentle drizzle began, not enough to wet the earth, but enough to carry the scent of rain freshly mingled with soil. Each droplet seemed to pause mid-air, suspended in a silver shimmer before softly falling into the glow of the flowers. Persephone watched, absorbing the lesson of patience that came with it. That change was never sudden or violent here, but rhythmic, deliberate, and gentle. She could tend, guide, and nurture, but she could not rush what was meant to unfold naturally. As the garden cycled through its soft seasons around her, Persephone realized that the quiet hours she spent here were not just about tending the plants, the flowers, or the memory-laden blossoms. They were about tending herself, too. The calm reflection, the gentle rhythm, and the patient unfolding of growth and dormancy taught her to navigate both her own inner landscape and the world above. Each season, though soft and deliberate, carried with it clarity and guidance, and she moved in harmony with that flow, steady and serene. The garden pulsed gently, a living, breathing meditation, and Persephone felt a profound alignment with its essence. The quiet hours stretched onward, carrying her along in the soft current of time. She knew the balance she restored here would echo outward, colouring her reign in the underworld and her visits above, allowing her to navigate the seasons of life with a calm that was both protective and sustaining. Persephone lingered near the centre of her hidden garden, the steady pulse of the seasons fading into a gentle lull. The flowers around her had slowed their subtle dances, petals curling inward as though preparing for a quiet rest. Yet in this calm, one small bloom had not yet opened, tucked beneath the shadow of a low-hanging branch of the silver-leafed tree. Its petals were tightly furled, glowing faintly with a light that felt both hesitant and expectant. Persephone approached, sensing that this final blossom carried something extraordinary, something meant solely for her to witness. She knelt carefully, letting her fingers hover just above the delicate petals. A faint warmth radiated from within, brushing against her palms even before she touched it. The air seemed to lean closer, the subtle hum of the garden's memory song amplifying, almost like a collective intake of breath. Persephone exhaled slowly, steadying herself. In all her seasons of tending this sanctuary, she had rarely encountered a bloom that seemed to wait so deliberately for her presence. It was not simply a flower, it was a keeper of something intimate, something vital, a fragment of life meant to guide her. Finally, as if recognizing her patience, the petals began to unfurl. Slowly, deliberately, they opened like the turning of a key in a lock, revealing a soft, luminous core. From within, a vision unfolded, not projected into the air, but whispered directly into her mind, delicate and clear. She saw herself on a high meadow of the mortal world, standing in sunlight that smelled faintly of honey and earth, surrounded by people she had loved and watched over in passing. The memory was tender, quiet, children laughing as they ran past her, a soft breeze lifting hair from foreheads, an elderly couple sharing a knowing glance on a sun-dappled bench. These were moments she had observed but rarely touched in her memory. Small glimpses of lives that moved swiftly above, far from the slow pulse of the underworld. Persephone's heart warmed. She could feel the joy in those fleeting hours, the subtle, almost imperceptible currents of connection, trust, and growth. They were ordinary, yes, but in their ordinariness lay profound truth. Life was made of these small, gentle moments, and even in her absence, the world moved forward with rhythm and resilience. The bloom's vision reminded her that her role was not to hold everything close or to intervene in every detail, but to watch, to remember, and to honour. It was an acceptance that came not through command, but through tenderness, an understanding that letting things be was often as important as shaping them. The petals shivered lightly under her touch, carrying a faint warmth that mirrored the emotions of the memory. Persephone traced a fingertip along the curve of the bloom, letting it anchor her to the lesson it held. She felt a slow, deep calm spread through her, a gentle certainty that the balance she sought in her garden and in herself did not require perfection, only presence. The garden itself seemed to acknowledge this realization. The petals of surrounding flowers leaned subtly toward the open bloom, a soft chorus of quiet applause. Time flowed differently here, measured not by hours or minutes, but by the rhythm of life itself. Persephone remained kneeling, absorbing the final message, and allowed the vision to deepen. She saw herself walking between the realms, above and below, not burdened by duty or the need to control, but guided by understanding, empathy, and patience. The memory unfolded like a gentle stream, carrying her through the currents of loss, joy, and fleeting happiness. Each scene a reminder that she was connected to the world, not through force, but through care. The soft glow from the final bloom spread outward, a light not harsh but comforting, touching neighbouring flowers and bathing the garden in a uniform, gentle luminescence. Persephone inhaled the scent of the petals, sweet, earthy, grounding, and felt a ripple of satisfaction in the quiet hours of the garden. It was a light that did not demand attention but invited reflection, one that reminded her that her role as observer and caretaker was enough, that her presence in the garden, in the underworld, and in fleeting visits above was meaningful in its gentleness. She stood, letting the memory settle within her, a soft weight of acceptance pressing lightly against her chest. The garden around her exhaled, petals adjusting in soft rhythm, and the air shimmered faintly with residual warmth from the final bloom. Persephone walked slowly among the plants, her steps steady and unhurried. Each blossom she passed seemed to acknowledge her transformation, nodding subtly with the motion of windless air. The lessons of quiet patience, attentive presence, and gentle acceptance had been absorbed fully. Finally, she paused near the silver-leafed tree, looking up at the branches that had framed the final bloom. The garden felt complete, not stagnant, but in harmony with itself and with her. A single thought, clear and calm, settled in her mind. That balance was not a fixed point, but a practice, a quiet tending of self and surroundings, an acceptance of the world's flow in all its beauty and imperfection. Persephone exhaled one last time, allowing the lingering glow of the memory to fill her senses. She would carry this final lesson into the seasons to come, into both her realms, her movements guided not by expectation or fear, but by quiet understanding. The garden, now fully settled, hummed softly, a living reminder that even the smallest moments could illuminate the path toward acceptance, and that sometimes the last light offered the clearest guidance. The night was thick with quiet, the kind of stillness that presses softly against the ears and seems to deepen the darkness rather than dispel it. In a hidden grove where shadows pooled like slow-moving water, Hecate appeared, her cloak brushing the damp earth and her eyes reflecting the faint silver light of the moon. In her hands she carried a lantern simple in form, yet somehow imbued with a presence all its own. It had lain dormant for hours, perhaps days or centuries. In the deep hush of this place, time felt both fleeting and endless. Hecate lifted the lantern, and as she did, a tiny spark flickered to life inside it. It was not a flame of ordinary fire, but a light that seemed to breathe, small yet full of curiosity. The glow reached outward, brushing against the trunks of trees and the moss-laden stones beneath her feet. Shadows shifted immediately, as if the darkness were careful not to disturb the lantern's delicate rhythm. The world seemed to hold its breath in response, waiting for the lantern to claim its first steps. The paths ahead, barely perceptible before, began to outline themselves under the lantern's glow. They were not conventional trails, no beaten earth or compacted stone, but rather subtle hints of direction, a patch of moonlight reflected on damp leaves, a faint shimmer along the curve of a hidden creek, a line of glowing lichen that pulsed gently as if in recognition. The grove itself seemed to stretch and lean toward the lantern, creating a faint corridor of possibility. Hecate did not hurry. She walked with deliberate calm, aware that the lantern's awakening would pull forth more than simple illumination. It would awaken intention, mystery, and subtle invitation. As she moved forward, the lantern responded to her touch, its glow intensifying slightly, then dimming as if testing her awareness. Hecate's eyes followed the shifting patterns of light and shadow. Paths twisted unexpectedly, some leading between dense clusters of trees, others opening to clearings where the grass shimmered faintly. She noticed small details, a fern that curled toward the light, a low-hanging branch that bent as if bowing to her presence, a ripple across a pool of water that reflected the lantern as both lantern and guide. The grove felt alive, attentive to her movements, reshaping itself as she walked without a word. From somewhere deep within the forest, a whisper of wind carried faint, melodic hums. They were neither voice nor song, but resonances that hinted at hidden currents of energy threading through the trees and soil. The lantern's light seemed to pulse in sync with these hums, throwing flecks of illumination onto gnarled roots and mossy stones. Hecate adjusted her grip, feeling the subtle vibration through the handle, through the core of the lantern, and through the soles of her boots. The night was revealing its secret architecture to her, corridors and crossings that only responded to patience and attention. A soft rustle came from the undergrowth. Hecate paused, but it was not danger she sensed. The grove was testing, revealing, offering. A small figure, barely visible under the shadows, appeared and then melted back into the night. A faint trace of light shimmered behind it, like a firefly acknowledging the lantern's awakening. Hecate nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and continued forward, her steps measured to allow the grove and the lantern to synchronize further. She reached a fork in the paths, a place where the darkness seemed to hesitate. One trail wound into dense trees, their trunks converging overhead to create a tunnel of nearly complete shadow. The other opened into a clearing with soft, glowing mist hovering just above the ground, diffusing the light in a gentle haze. Hecate's lantern pulsed once, subtly brighter, and she realized that the light was not just illuminating paths, but inviting choices. It would reveal, but not decide. The guidance was there, always patient, always responsive, yet never forcing her hand. The grove whispered faintly, a rhythm carried in the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of unseen creatures. Hecate adjusted the lantern, angling its glow to reach further into the mist. Tiny motes of light rose from the undergrowth, joining the lantern's radiance in a slow, coordinated dance. The air smelled faintly of earth after rain, moss, and something indefinably sweet, a scent that spoke of thresholds and beginnings. She could feel the potential in the paths, like a quiet charge in the marrow of the night. With a steady hand, Hecate lifted the lantern higher. Its light expanded, stretching beyond the immediate grove, teasing the edges of paths yet to fully materialize. Shadows shifted once more, folding into new shapes and possibilities. A sense of expectation settled over her, not heavy but alive, guiding her to move forward without haste. She understood, as she always did in these moments, that the night was a teacher, and the lantern a partner, a co-conspirator, revealing the unseen corners of the world. The first steps had been taken, the lantern's awakening had begun, and the night, patient and infinite, responded with soft murmurs and dancing shadows. Hecate walked onward, calm, deliberate, and fully present, aware that the paths she illuminated were only the beginning of journeys, both mysterious and profound. The glow from Hecate's lantern stretched further into the night, brushing against trees that leaned in like silent sentinels, and illuminating paths that had long been hidden beneath shadows. The forest around her seemed to deepen, not with menace, but with the weight of quiet histories. Roots twisted underfoot, curling around stones and each other, carrying the echoes of countless footsteps, some mortal, some not. Hecate moved deliberately, feeling the subtle pulse of the lantern's light in her hands, aware that it had a consciousness of its own, responsive and patient. Ahead, the paths began to converge, and the subtle shimmer of mist thickened. The air felt charged with expectation, a hush that hinted at crossings, meetings, and decisions long deferred. As she advanced, faint figures began to emerge from the folds of shadow, wandering spirits, their forms indistinct, drifting between trees and the edges of the moonlit clearings. Some paused, seemingly uncertain of their direction, drawn toward the lantern's glow, as though it were both compass and sanctuary. Others floated silently, absorbed in their own histories, oblivious to all but their internal compass, yet subtly nudged forward by the light's soft insistence. Hecate's presence was quiet but undeniable. She walked with measured steps, her cloak brushing the dew-kissed grass, lantern held steadily before her. Every so often, a spirit hesitated, sensing her guidance, and then moved closer to the light, their forms becoming clearer, sometimes the faint outline of a figure in repose, sometimes more ephemeral, like mist shaped into human memory. The lantern pulsed gently, and the spirits responded, shifting toward its glow, a rhythm that seemed almost musical, almost conscious. The forest seemed to fold around these gatherings, creating small clearings where paths intersected in ways that had been forgotten by mortal memory. Twisting roots and branches wove naturally into archways and corridors, creating crossroads that existed in the soft space between realms. Each path felt laden with potential, and yet without the lantern's light, these junctions would remain hidden, overlooked by wanderers unaware of their own need for direction. Hecate paused at one of these crossings, letting the lantern's radiance stretch across all angles, revealing the subtle network of trails that connected one shadow to the next. A small spirit drifted into the circle of light, its form flickering between solidity and shadow. It seemed hesitant, caught between the pull of several paths. Hecate lowered the lantern slightly, allowing the glow to touch the figure fully. A pulse of warmth radiated outward, and the spirit's form steadied. It lingered, then moved with careful confidence toward one of the illuminated trails. Hecate didn't speak, didn't need to. The lantern's light carried the assurance the spirit sought, and with each step, the crossing revealed its purpose, a junction not only of place, but of choice. More spirits appeared at nearby intersections, drawn from the misty forest by the subtle beckoning of the lantern. Some were lost souls, others fragments of memory, or shadows of those whose journeys had stalled. Each seemed to pause as they reached the illuminated crossroads, their ephemeral forms bending toward the light, as if recognizing a familiar hand. Hecate's careful movements guided them not by command, but by the soft insistence of presence, the patient rhythm of someone who understood that direction is not given in haste but in gentle illumination. Branches shifted above her, creating natural arches under which some spirits passed, their forms brushing against moonlit leaves. Tiny lights, perhaps echoes of forgotten lanterns, flickered briefly before fading into the background. The crossroads themselves seemed to hold memories of travellers who had once paused there, each intersection a convergence of choices and unseen guidance. The lantern's glow teased out these subtle imprints, allowing Hecate and those who followed to perceive the underlying patterns of movement, connection, and quiet purpose. One of the wider clearings revealed a spirit wandering aimlessly, nearly dissolving into the darkness around it. The lantern's light touched the figure fully, revealing a faint outline of a human hand reaching out, a silent plea for direction. Hecate adjusted the lantern slightly, and a trail of faint light unfolded before the spirit, winding between twisted roots and mossy stones. With a hesitant motion, the spirit began its journey along the illuminated path. The lantern pulsed in response, steady and encouraging, and the forest seemed to sigh in relief. Hecate continued onward, aware that each step revealed not only the paths themselves, but also the responsibility of her watchfulness. The crossroads were spaces of quiet power, places where decisions, even those taken unknowingly by wandering souls, could ripple outward into life and memory. With every pulse of the lantern, she exposed the hidden choices and gentle guidance that allowed lost spirits to find their direction. Her hands remained steady, her presence calm. The lantern, a constant companion and a subtle conductor of movement through night and shadow. The mist thinned slightly as she moved, revealing intersections that had been obscured for countless nights. The lantern's glow fell upon delicate flowers, patches of moss, and hidden streams, each marking thresholds that might otherwise go unnoticed. Even as the spirits moved toward their paths, Hecate felt the weight of her vigilance, the quiet responsibility of ensuring that the light reached where it was needed most. The forest hummed softly around her, alive with anticipation, and the crossroads pulsed gently in the presence of her lantern. Hecate's lantern glowed steadily in her hands, a soft, unwavering beacon against the night that stretched thick and cool around her. The crossroads she had revealed moments before now hummed faintly, as if the ground itself remembered the touch of wandering souls. Each path she illuminated carried a subtle current of energy, invisible to mortal eyes, that drew lost spirits forward with gentle insistence. Hecate moved slowly, her steps measured, attuned to the soft rhythms of the forest and the whispers of those drifting along its dim corridors. A faint shimmer appeared near the base of a twisted oak, where a small spirit had paused, hesitant and uncertain. Its form wavered like a candle flame in still air, flickering between the edges of presence and shadow. Hecate lowered the lantern, letting its light wash over the figure. A warmth spread outward, brushing the spirit's edges, steadying it. It shivered briefly, then began to drift forward, following the soft illumination that traced a winding path between roots and moss-covered stones. Hecate allowed her hand to guide the lantern slightly, a subtle adjustment that made the path feel safer, more certain. Other spirits emerged from hidden groves and behind boulders, each appearing to seek something they had long forgotten or perhaps never fully known. One drifted along silently, its gaze fixed inward, the shape of memory and longing barely perceptible. Another hesitated at a fork, unsure which direction would lead to quiet or release. Hecate's presence was patient, her lantern casting gentle arcs of light that suggested rather than dictated. With each subtle movement, she led them forward, allowing them to take the first steps themselves, trusting that the guidance she provided would reach them in their own time. The paths were narrow and winding, sometimes dipping beneath low-hanging branches, other times opening to small clearings where the mist hung thick and silver. The lantern's glow adapted, illuminating obstacles without harshness, tracing the subtle contours of roots, stones, and uneven earth. Hecate's calm voice sometimes whispered, though not always words-soft intonations that carried the rhythm of reassurance. "This way," she murmured quietly to one hesitant spirit, the sound weaving with the pulse of the lantern. "Follow the light. It was enough." She paused at a bend where the path divided, the mist thickening to obscure what lay ahead. Two spirits floated near the edge of uncertainty, glancing at each other without recognition. Hecate lifted the lantern higher, and a pool of light fell across both of them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she rotated it, tracing the safest curve through the undergrowth. The spirits tilted slightly in response, leaning toward the illumination as though guided by an unseen hand. With careful patience, Hecate led them past hidden roots and low branches, past soft pools of dew and patches of glowing moss, until the path merged into a gentle clearing. There, the lantern's light expanded, surrounding them in a sense of peace that had been absent only moments before. The forest seemed to respond to her movements. Shadows parted willingly, leaves swayed in unspoken acknowledgement, and the faint hum beneath the earth pulsed in harmony with her pace. Each spirit that Hecate guided left a subtle imprint on the land, a trace of gratitude that shifted the rhythm of the pathways. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible transformation, but she felt it fully, the reassurance that her work extended beyond the immediate glow. Every life, even in shadow, carried echoes that intertwined with the gardened order of the night. One particularly hesitant spirit paused at a fork where two paths seemed equally plausible. Its form wavered, faintly luminous, but unsettled. Hecate stepped closer, holding the lantern just high enough to reveal the subtle cues of the safer route. The light caught a small stone, partially hidden beneath fallen leaves, marking the way. She inclined her head slightly, offering no words beyond a soft hum of encouragement. The spirit hesitated, then followed, its form stabilizing, shoulders straightening as if the weight of uncertainty lifted fractionally. Hecate watched, letting the lantern illuminate the path ahead without forcing her hand, trusting that the light would carry the spirit far enough to find its own resolution. As she continued along the winding corridors of forest and mist, the night deepened in both shadow and quietude. The lantern pulsed gently, echoing the rhythm of her calm breath. Hecate's movements were unhurried, each step a deliberate act of guidance. Small echoes of past travellers seemed to stir in the leaves and moss, as though the forest remembered every soul that had ever sought direction here. She allowed the lantern to hover near the ground for one spirit, then arc upward for another, shifting in response to need and uncertainty. Eventually, she reached a larger clearing where the paths converged once more. The mist was lighter here, and the spirits she had guided paused briefly, each radiating a faint glow that spoke of quiet relief. Hecate lowered the lantern slightly, letting its light wash over the entire space. The drifting figures swayed gently, gathering the calm she had nurtured into their own forms, and the sense of tension and uncertainty that had shadowed them softened into something resembling peace. She stayed for a moment, breathing in the quiet, observing the effect of her careful guidance. Each path she had illuminated, each hesitant soul she had led, had responded to her patience and the lantern's steady light. The forest seemed to hum with approval, a deep, grounded resonance that acknowledged her presence. Hecate allowed herself a brief pause, letting the rhythm of the night, the lantern, and the drifting spirits align in a shared quietude. The clearing lay bathed in the soft, steady glow of Hecate's lantern. The faint mist curling around the edges of the illuminated paths like hesitant fingers reaching for reassurance. The spirits she had guided now hovered lightly along the trails she had revealed, their forms steadier, more confident. Some drifted slowly toward destinations unseen, their shapes growing clearer with each measured step, while others lingered briefly, drawing in the calm that the lantern seemed to radiate. Hecate remained at the centre, letting the gentle warmth of the light expand and fill the space around her without effort or haste. The lantern itself pulsed softly, responding to the ambient quiet. Its light, once bright and exploratory, now softened to a gentle shimmer, like a flame drawn low against the wind. The air carried a faint hum, subtle and warm, that resonated not only through the clearing but through Hecate herself. She felt the connection between her, the lantern, and the wandering souls, a delicate triangle of awareness and intention that had guided the night's work. This was not illumination for its own sake. It was an offering, a gift of clarity and reassurance for those who had lost their way. Hecate moved slowly among the paths, adjusting the lantern's light here, lowering it there, allowing its glow to touch the edges of roots, stones, and leaves without casting harsh shadows. Every motion was deliberate yet tender, a quiet choreography in which the lantern and she were partners. She sensed the subtle tension in the lingering spirits, their hesitation and lingering uncertainty, and focused on providing one final, gentle nudge, a soft pulse of the flame, a sweep of warmth, a quiet, wordless blessing that whispered of direction, safety, and peace. The crossroads she had revealed now seemed to settle into themselves. Paths that had wavered in and out of perception smoothed into natural forms, visible just long enough to allow passage, then gradually fading into shadow as the lantern's influence retracted. The spirits moved with growing assurance, some drifting along paths that curved softly into unseen destinations, others gathering briefly near the edges of the clearing, basking in the calm aura of the lantern's final glow. Hecate's hands remained steady, her cloak brushing the damp earth, her presence a constant, unspoken encouragement. A small figure lingered close by, more hesitant than the others, its form trembling slightly in the dim light. Hecate lowered the lantern just enough for the glow to wash over it fully. She inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement and blessing, and let the subtle pulse of the lantern infuse the spirit with reassurance. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the figure straightened, then began to follow a narrow path that curled away into the mist. The lantern dimmed slightly, signalling that its guidance was complete here, and yet it retained a warm presence, a quiet assurance that the journey, though solitary, would not be without care. Around her, the forest seemed to exhale. Shadows softened, leaves rustled faintly, and the mist began to lift just enough for shapes of trees, stones, and moss to emerge with gentle clarity. Hecate walked deliberately among the dimming paths, allowing the lantern's glow to linger on junctions and crossings where it had been needed most. Each pulse of light was measured, a final offering of direction and protection. The wandering spirits had found temporary grounding, the crossroads had been honoured, and the forest itself seemed to settle into a patient, rhythmic quiet. Hecate paused at the edge of the clearing, holding the lantern slightly higher, letting its light extend just far enough to touch the last of the drifting figures. The glow was now soft, almost ethereal, refracting subtly through the mist. She exhaled slowly, feeling the tension of the night ease from her shoulders. The lantern's gift was complete. paths had been revealed, guidance offered, and the wandering had been soothed. All that remained was to allow the light to recede gently, leaving behind a sense of calm and closure that would linger long after she departed. As the final souls drifted along their chosen trails, the lantern pulsed once, a quiet affirmation of its work. Hecate's hand lingered on the handle, then tilted it just so, letting the glow recede into a gentle shimmer that mirrored the pulse of her own steady breath. She sensed the forest aligning once more, the crossroads fading into memory yet retaining their quiet significance. The air felt lighter, the mist softer, the night itself at ease. Finally, Hecate turned, the lantern now a dim, comforting presence in her grasp, and allowed the soft shadows to reclaim their space. The spirits were guided, the paths had been honoured, and the forest rested. She stepped lightly across the clearing, knowing that her quiet intervention had provided more than illumination. It had offered the possibility of resolution, the soft assurance that even in darkness, guidance can be found. The lantern's glow pulsed once more, soft and steady, then settled into a lasting warmth that lingered in the memory of the night. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the horizon, painting the calm sea with soft streaks of pink and gold. The water was almost glass-like, broken only by the occasional ripple of a distant fish or the gentle sway of a tethered boat. On the edge of this quiet morning, a lone fisherman prepared his small craft, the scent of salt and damp wood rising in the air. His hands were rough and familiar with the line and net, but today, as he adjusted the oars, a subtle sensation tugged at his chest, an unusual pull that seemed to originate from somewhere deeper than the ordinary ebb of the tide. It was not wind or current that called to him, nor the usual whispers of gulls circling overhead. This pull was quieter, patient, almost insistent, like a heartbeat under the waves that beckoned specifically to him. He paused, resting a calloused hand against the side of his boat, listening. The sea stretched endlessly before him, tranquil and unassuming. Yet beneath its placid surface, he could feel a movement, a rhythm distinct from the familiar push and pull of tides. The fisherman's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing that the day held more than the routine of nets and fish. He set out slowly, pushing the boat into the gentle swell, letting the oars cut lightly through the water. The world above remained calm, the horizon still soft and inviting, but below a subtle tug persisted, pulling at his intuition, guiding him toward a point unseen. It was a delicate persuasion, not a forceful command, and he felt compelled to follow it with patience rather than haste. Each stroke of the oars aligned with the faint rhythm that called to him, as though the sea itself had chosen this morning to speak in a language only he could hear. Around him, the usual signs of dawn unfolded. A few gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the quiet, and the faint shimmer of light reflected across the crests of the small waves. The fisherman's net hung idle, untouched for now, as if acknowledging that today's catch would not be of ordinary fish. He ran a hand along the worn wood of the boat, feeling the salt and the grain, grounding himself, yet his mind remained attuned to the subtle pull beneath the surface. It was hypnotic in its gentleness, a soft insistence that promised discovery if only he could remain steady and attentive. As he rowed further from shore, the pull grew more distinct, though still gentle, a guiding current beneath the calm. Occasionally, a small ripple broke the mirror-like surface of the water, like a signal, yet each time he looked, there was no disturbance to explain it. The fisherman's heart began to quicken, not in alarm, but in wonder. Something awaited him, something hidden in the depths, a presence patient and deliberate, guiding him through the quiet dawn. He adjusted his course, letting the invisible thread of the sea direct him, trusting that his instincts, honed over years of patient labour, would not fail him. The horizon brightened further, and the first tendrils of sunlight caught the surface in glittering streaks. A distant shoal of fish moved beneath the surface, undisturbed by his passage. Yet it seemed as though the sea beneath his boat whispered again, nudging him gently toward a singular point where the water's rhythm changed imperceptibly. He leaned forward, peering into the clear shallows, noting the subtle shift in colour, the slight dip in the swell. Here, the pull was unmistakable, a soft tug at both hand and heart. He felt the sea's patience, a quiet insistence, like a conversation that did not need words. Each gentle wave seemed to guide him closer to where the pull originated, and he allowed the current to cradle the boat, following the invisible signs with calm reverence. The smell of salt deepened, mingling with the warmth of morning air, and a faint shimmer beneath the surface caught his eye, an unusual gleam, too steady and bright to be a reflection of sunlight on water. His fingers brushed the edge of the oar, steadying himself, and he leaned slightly forward, curiosity rooting him firmly in the boat. Something in the depths pulsed faintly with life and intelligence, a presence that was neither fish nor debris, but something larger, patient and deliberate. The fisherman sensed it instinctively, a subtle but compelling rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing through the water. He paused, letting the boat drift slowly, and allowed himself to be led by the tug that had drawn him from the familiar shores. There was no fear, only the quiet thrill of a discovery waiting beneath the calm surface, a promise hidden in the deep and timeless expanse of the sea. The world around him remained still, yet the tide's call grew more insistent in its subtle way, guiding him toward the moment where ordinary life might meet something extraordinary. A single thought settled in his mind, that today the sea had chosen to speak directly to him, and he could either follow its gentle pull or remain in the safety of routine. With steady hands and a calm heart, he let the tide guide him, each stroke of the oar bringing him closer to the mystery waiting just beneath the surface. The pull from the sea grew stronger as the fisherman drifted farther from the familiar shoreline, the soft morning light filtering through a haze of mist that hovered above the water. The calm surface rippled with subtle hints of movement below, an unseen current tugging at his boat with gentle insistence. His heart beat steadily, attuned to the rhythm of the tide, and with each cautious stroke he felt the ocean's invisible hand guiding him towards something hidden yet profoundly alive. The usual morning chorus of gulls and waves seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet dialogue between him and the deep. Beneath the water, a faint shimmer began to pulse, soft at first, like moonlight caught on a small wave. The fisherman leaned over the side, squinting into the depths, and his eyes traced the movement of something luminous, suspended just beneath the surface. It was unlike any fish he had ever seen, glowing with a serene, otherworldly light that shifted slowly in response to his gaze. His hand rested lightly on the edge of the boat, fingers brushing the weathered wood, grounding him as he followed the glow, allowing the tide to carry him forward. The pull had transformed from subtle suggestion to a quiet insistence, a gentle urging that promised discovery if only he trusted the rhythm of the sea. As he moved closer, the shimmer grew, expanding into a faint halo beneath the water. The ocean itself seemed to hold its breath, and the gentle lapping of waves against the boat became almost ceremonial, marking the approach to something extraordinary. The light was soft, almost liquid, refracting through the water in slow arcs that resembled the shimmer of moonlight on calm waves. The fisherman's pulse quickened with quiet awe. He had fished these waters for years and never encountered anything so serene, so deliberate. The presence beneath the surface radiated intelligence, patience, and a certain sacred stillness. The pearl revealed itself gradually, rising from the depths as if acknowledging his arrival. It was larger than he expected, perfectly round, and glowing from within with a steady, aquamarine light that seemed to pulse in sync with the rhythm of the tide. It floated suspended beneath the water, untethered, yet immovable in its subtle dominance of the small area around it. Tiny currents spiraled gently around the pearl, as though the sea itself was circling in reverence, keeping the waters calm and pure. The fisherman felt the undeniable sense that this was no ordinary treasure. It was alive in its own way, a jewel of the sea that carried the weight of oceanic memory and the authority of Poseidon himself. He reached out cautiously, fingertips hovering above the water's surface, feeling the pull of the pearl as if it were calling to him personally. A faint warmth radiated upward through the water, brushing his skin, and the light shifted slightly, reflecting his tentative curiosity. The water's calm surface trembled just enough to hint at the immense power resting below. The fisherman hesitated, recognizing that this discovery was not something to grasp lightly. It demanded respect, patience, and an understanding that its presence was intertwined with forces far greater than his own daily toil. A small wave lapped against the boat, and the pearl seemed to pulse again, the glow intensifying briefly before settling into a steady, mesmerizing rhythm. The fisherman inhaled, tasting salt and seaweed in the air, and slowly extended a hand, letting his fingertips brush the surface above it. The water was cool, yet the pearl's presence radiated a subtle warmth, like the heartbeat of the ocean itself. He sensed intelligence and deliberation in the shimmer beneath him, a consciousness aware of him, observing him, assessing whether he could meet the moment with quiet humility and care. The surrounding waters seemed to respond to his reverent attention. Tiny currents swirled, lifting small schools of fish gently aside, as though granting space for the pearl to remain undisturbed yet visible. The ocean's pulse matched the glow of the jewel, an unspoken rhythm that the fisherman attuned to instinctively. Every wave, every ripple seemed carefully measured, creating a soft choreography that allowed him to witness the pearl fully without fear of disruption. He understood, in a quiet, intuitive way, that this was Poseidon's gift to the patient and attentive, an offering of trust to one who had earned the right simply by listening to the tide. He lingered over the water, captivated by the sight, letting the pearl's steady radiance sink into his awareness. The calm morning air, the shimmer beneath the waves, the rhythmic pulse of the tide, all combined to create a moment suspended outside ordinary time. He realized that the sea had guided him here, not for immediate gain, but for presence, for recognition of the sacred hidden within familiar waters. The pearl was not merely a treasure, it was a lesson, a call to understand that patience, reverence, and attention could reveal wonders unnoticed by those who only sought what was obvious. With careful movements, he allowed the boat to drift slightly closer, aligning himself with the pull without disturbing the waters unnecessarily. The pearl hovered in its luminous cradle, unwavering yet responsive, a silent dialogue forming between him and the vast, patient ocean. Every subtle pulse of light seemed to communicate trust, expectation, and a gentle reminder that some treasures are revealed only to those willing to move slowly and with care. The fisherman stayed in the calm, letting the presence of Poseidon's pearl settle fully into his senses, aware that this moment would shape the rest of his days. The pearl hovered beneath the calm surface, its soft aquamarine glow pulsing like a heartbeat in perfect harmony with the subtle rhythm of the tide. The fisherman remained poised, knees slightly bent in the boat, hands resting lightly on the edge, unsure how to respond to a presence that seemed alive and aware. It was no ordinary object, he realized, no mere treasure to be claimed. The glow seemed to reach out to him, patient but insistent, carrying a sense of intention that weighed gently upon his mind. The sea itself had drawn him here, and the pearl was its messenger, a test wrapped in quiet beauty. As he peered into the depths, the water rippled slightly, and he felt the faint tug of currents unlike any he had navigated before. This was more than gravity or ordinary tide. It was deliberate, as if the ocean itself were breathing, watching him, coaxing him to understand something beyond his daily labour. The pearl's glow shifted subtly, and he sensed a message without words. Every action carried consequence, and the choices one made in the presence of great power resonated far beyond what the eye could see. The fisherman swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. He had thought he came seeking fortune, or perhaps wonder, yet now he realized he had stumbled into a moment of decision that required more than curiosity, it demanded reflection. A breeze lifted the faint morning mist, brushing across his face, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. The pearl shimmered, pulsing gently, as if to match the rhythm of his own pulse. He understood, slowly, that the object beneath him was not merely to be taken. It offered a choice, one that could alter the trajectory of his life, perhaps even the life of the waters themselves. He felt the weight of it in his chest, a gentle pressure that urged him to consider carefully, to listen not only with his eyes, but with his instincts and his heart. The water shifted slightly, and he noticed tiny spirals of light, tracing lines from the pearl outward, weaving invisible currents that reached toward the horizon. Each line seemed to represent a potential path, a consequence unknown but perceptible. And he realized that the pearl was offering more than illumination, it was offering awareness. The sea, in all its patient vastness, had entrusted him with a glimpse into forces far older and more deliberate than his own humble hands could manipulate. In that moment, he felt both humbled and honoured. Hecate's gentle whisper in the underworld or the guiding pulse of the lantern could never have prepared him for this. Here, the quiet power of the ocean demanded a response rooted in awareness. The fisherman's mind raced briefly with questions. Should he take the pearl and risk disrupting the balance of the tides? Should he leave it submerged, preserving the quiet mystery of the deep? And yet, the pearl seemed to wait for him to decide, luminous and patient, offering insight without pressure, invitation without coercion. It was a teaching in patience, humility, and the careful weighing of consequence. He extended a tentative hand, stopping just short of the water. The pearl pulsed more brightly, as if acknowledging the recognition of choice, and he sensed the subtle feedback of the tide itself responding to his hesitation. The ocean had never spoken to him like this, never revealed a crossroad so personal and intricate. Every fibre of his being recognized that the pearl's power was not measured in gold or simple utility, but in the responsibility it demanded, in the awareness it awakened in those who sought to claim it. Moments passed slowly, each one stretched by the weight of the decision before him. The sea was calm, yet alive, carrying the silent promise of reward or lesson, depending on the choice he made. He saw the potential consequences ripple outward in a way that words could not describe, the currents of small waves expanding invisibly into larger patterns, shifting fish and water, even the tides themselves subtly adjusting to his attention. The pearl was not just an object, it was a living testament to the quiet influence of the ocean, a reminder that every act, even the smallest, is part of a vast and interconnected whole. The fisherman's chest rose and fell with steady breaths, matching the slow pulsing of the pearl's glow. He felt the tide pressing gently beneath his boat, guiding him not by force but by suggestion, by subtle insistence. The sea, patient and enduring, offered him a bargain, the opportunity to touch power, to experience its beauty, and to choose wisely. With that, he realized the gravity of the lesson that the ocean's gifts were never free, never casual, and never simple. They were invitations to awareness, tests of humility, and openings to understanding the deep currents of life beyond ordinary vision. He lowered his hand slightly, letting the warmth of the morning sun wash over him, and acknowledged the responsibility that now rested in quiet balance upon his shoulders. To take or to leave, this was the choice the pearl offered, framed not in haste or desire, but in reflection, patience, and the understanding that some powers demand awareness before they can be touched. The tide whispered softly around him, the pearl pulsing in serene patience, and the fisherman felt the first stirring of clarity settle in his chest, a grounding calm that spoke of decisions yet to come. The fisherman rested his hands lightly on the oars, letting the gentle pull of the tide guide the boat back toward familiar shores. The pearl remained below the surface, its glow soft and steady, a quiet presence he could feel rather than see, as though the ocean had lent him a fragment of its own calm, without asking for more than his understanding in return. The morning sun had risen higher now, warming his shoulders and turning the surface of the water into a glittering mosaic of gold and silver. Every ripple seemed to echo the lesson he had been given. Every wave a gentle reminder that the world carried depth beyond what could be immediately grasped. He glanced down once, tracing the faint shimmer beneath the water where the pearl hovered, suspended yet utterly serene. The decision he had faced felt resolved in a way that did not require words or even action. The very act of witnessing the pearl and acknowledging its quiet authority had changed him. It was not treasure in the ordinary sense, not a prize to take and display, but an offering of insight and perspective. The sea had shown him patience, reverence, and the value of restraint, and he carried that lesson back to shore as carefully as he carried his nets and oars. Around him, the early morning sounds returned slowly to the world, gulls calling across the bay, the soft slap of the water against the hull, the whisper of wind threading through the rigging. But the fisherman noticed a difference now in the rhythm of it all, a subtle harmony with the pulse of the sea beneath him. Each wave, each movement of water, was both familiar and subtly altered, a reminder that he had stepped into a conversation with forces far larger than himself, and that even ordinary life could carry traces of that encounter if he remained attentive. He guided the boat slowly, letting the currents ease him forward, while keeping his senses tuned to the soft, almost imperceptible tug of the ocean's calm. It was not a command, but a reminder of the gentle partnership between human and tide, a lesson that some of the greatest gifts were not seized, but recognized. The glow of the pearl, steady and serene, seemed to settle into the boat itself, infusing him with a quiet confidence, a sense of continuity that stretched beyond the simple act of returning to land. The shoreline drew nearer, familiar reeds bending slightly with the morning breeze, small gulls hopping along the wet sand. The fisherman allowed himself a small, reflective smile, understanding that he had returned, changed in ways invisible yet profound. The pearl had not been taken, and yet in letting it remain, he had claimed something perhaps more valuable, the knowledge that calm, thoughtful attention, and respect for forces larger than oneself could reveal treasures deeper than any material prize. The sea had offered its quiet power, and he had accepted it in the only way it truly required, with humility, presence, and patience. As his boat slid into the shallow water near the shore, he reached down and touched the oars lightly, feeling the familiar texture of wood and salt water beneath his fingers. He had spent countless mornings on this same stretch of water, yet today the world seemed slightly more luminous, every detail infused with quiet possibility. The drift of mist, the shimmer of tide pools, even the faint reflections in the wet sand carried a sense of continuity, a reminder that the sea's quiet lessons could accompany him in both calm and storm. He stepped onto the shore carefully, letting the boat settle behind him, and took a deep breath of the salty air. The pull of the tides had faded to a whisper. The pearl's glow, now a memory, felt deep within the chest rather than a visible radiance beneath the water. He walked slowly along the sand, each step deliberate, grounding himself in the lessons of the morning. The world seemed the same outwardly, yet subtly altered in the way that understanding alters perception. He had seen patience, restraint, and quiet power embodied in the depths, and those qualities now flowed within him, steady and guiding. Behind him, the sea remained calm, its surface glittering in the morning sun, carrying the pearl in silent, steady patience. It had offered its gift without demand, and in response he had learned the quiet rhythm of acknowledgement, the gentle art of listening, and the enduring grace of restraint. The tide would continue, the waves would move, and the pearl would remain a beacon beneath the surface. Yet he carried the calm of its glow within himself, a reminder of the subtle ways the world imparts wisdom to those willing to pause and pay attention. The fisherman turned inland, toward the village, where smoke now rose from morning fires and the scent of baked bread drifted from nearby homes. He felt lighter, steadier, and somehow more attuned to the quiet rhythms of life, the ebb and flow of ordinary days, the hidden currents beneath everyday moments, and the gentle power of patience and choice. The sea had offered its lesson, the pearl had shared its presence, and he walked home with a calm that no ordinary catch could ever have provided.